Alright, so in my last video, I talked about how the reason I dropped out of college was because I became a pothead. And more specifically, I talked about the different ways in which weed affected me. You know, I talked about how it exacerbated some of my more negative qualities, like my laziness, my unwillingness to leave my comfort zone, and my complete lack of ambition. But despite all of those negative effects that I experienced from smoking, the actual most damaging thing that weed did to me was take away my ability to interact with other people. I mean, like I mentioned in that video, every time I would smoke, I would become just overly self-conscious and anxious and would just get absorbed by my own thoughts. And the more I smoked, the worse it became. Now, even after I dropped out, I still continued to smoke. It was less consistent, but it was still very off and on. I hadn't really identified smoking as one of my main flaws just yet, and so I continued to do it. But a couple of years ago, I actually did begin to identify and pinpoint that it was smoking that was keeping me from doing some of the things that I genuinely wanted to do with my life. And so I decided I was going to try to limit the amount that I smoked as much as possible. And yeah, even at that time, I was thinking to myself that I might need to just stop smoking altogether. And over the past 6 or 7 years, I've tried to do just that. But obviously, as evidenced by the fact that I'm making this video now, that didn't really work. And I know I've already talked about this in another video, but yeah, over the last 6 or 7 years, I've basically been in this cycle of either I'm not smoking or I am, and things are either going, I guess you could say, pretty well, or they're just completely falling apart. So for 6 months, things would be fine, and then for the next 6 months, everything would basically be crumbling around me. But in those 6 months where I wouldn't be in this free fall, I'd be trying to address some of the things that I've been addressing in my videos since I started making videos. That's part of the reason I've made videos about these things, because I've been dealing with them for the past 10 years. But anyway, as I was saying, in those times where things weren't completely falling apart, I would try to address some of these issues. And one issue that I put a lot of emphasis on was my inability to interact with people. And so I'd say that for the past 7 years, since I identified that smoking was a problem and that I would need to eventually stop, I've placed a lot of emphasis on trying to relearn how to be comfortable around people again and just how to interact. And let me tell you, it has not been a fun experience. Nope. Consciously trying to reteach yourself how to interact with people, especially when you are a 20-something-year-old and most people already expect you to be able to do most of the basics conversationally, has just not been great. But I am now in a place where, again, it's been almost a year since I last smoked, and I've been reflecting a lot on this conscious effort to relearn how to interact with people. And in that reflection, I kind of realized that today I'm in a very different place than I was 7 years ago. And I'm in a very different place than where I was even a year ago. And so I just wanted to talk about it and just kind of document what that progression has been like. Because I can remember some of the first times that I would get out of the smoking / depression phase and into those phases where things would start to look up. And in those phases, like I said, I would put emphasis on relearning how to interact. And so I would put myself in social situations because that's the only way that I was going to learn. I can remember specifically going into some of these social situations and getting into a conversation with somebody and just having none of the gears in my head turning. I mean, somebody would say something to me and I was like a deer in headlights. I would just look at them blankly like, I have no idea how to respond to this right now. And for the majority of conversations that I'd have with people, this was basically how it would go down. I would try to search for any type of response, but just nothing would come to my head. It was just empty. And so for 6 or 7 years, that's largely been the majority of my interactions with people. Now, obviously in that time, there were moments where that wasn't the case. And I think now that I'm reflecting on this time, I can see that there's been at least a little bit of progression. Now, again, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I still consider myself extremely socially awkward. And I still feel a deep, potent sense of social anxiety every time I have to interact with somebody. But I also see that there's been at least a little bit of progression to the point where I can at least generate responses now. So now when people are talking to me, I feel like there's a list developing in my head where I'm telling myself, oh, I can talk about that point that they mentioned, or I can go off on this point. And honestly, this feels so much better than not being able to generate responses in the first place. However, there's still a pretty big problem with this because after you generate that list, you still have to pick a direction to go in. And so now my main issue is that I don't always make the right choice. There are so many times that somebody will be telling me a story or telling me just about their day, and I might get really excited about something that they mentioned. And so I might pick that thing out and go off on a tangent about it, or just try to explore it further. And that's when it'll become clear that that person really didn't care about that one little thing that they mentioned that I got super excited about. I can't tell you how many times I've been texting one of my friends and they might mention something in 2 or 3 texts, and I pick out one of the things in that text and I expand on it, maybe sending 4 or 5 texts in response, and they'll just hit me with a cool or K. And I'm like, wait, we were just having a full-blown conversation. And I feel like I gave you like 4 or 5 things to respond to from my text. Dang, okay, so what did I miss? And then I'll look back on the conversation a day later and I'll realize that they clearly wanted to talk about something else. But because I just got so excited about one of the things that they mentioned, I took the conversation in a whole different direction. I mean, the other day I was on the phone talking to one of my family members about their job. And they were telling me about all of these different aspects of the job that are just so tedious to deal with right now. Now, I spend a lot of time on Reddit, and 2 of the subreddits that I spend a lot of time on are the anti-work subreddit and the work reform subreddit. And so as they were telling me about all these problems at their job, I was remembering all of these things that I had read on those subreddits and how there were so many similarities between what my family member was saying and what a lot of people on these subreddits are saying. And so as they were talking, I started to get really excited. I was like, oh, I have so much to say on this topic. And so I said all of those things. And when I got done, my family member, is very kind. So, they tried to accommodate, but clearly they were just very taken aback by all of this information that I just dumped on them. And so I could just kind of tell by their reaction that yes, even though they were being very kind, that they were a little thrown off with my response. And so for me, I think that's the next step in this progression of learning how to interact with people again. Because in my opinion, at least for me, it's not just about the ability to respond, but more so about the ability to respond appropriately. So I didn't realize it when I was talking to my family member, but after I realized, man, they really just needed a space to vent. And so responding appropriately would mean that however I respond, it would be in service of providing that space for them. Basically, I think it's about being able to identify the objective of the person you're having a conversation with in having this conversation in the first place, and then being able to provide that for them. Are they just trying to vent? Are they looking for a solution to a problem? Are they just bored and need a distraction? Or are they just trying to shoot the breeze? And I think that's the next stage in the progression. At least that's the goal I'm setting for myself as I try to learn how to interact with people again. I think most people can already do this subconsciously. I think for most people, this isn't even something that they have to break down and analyze. But for me, for whatever reason, I can't help but pay attention to it. But anyway, I think that's going to be it for this one. If my texting and vocal conversations are any indication, then I have a very long way to go. But as with most things, it's very helpful to be able to see any type of progress you make in trying to reach one of your goals, because it acts as positive reinforcement. And so that's kind of why I wanted to make this video. Because yeah, by no means would I say that I've relearned how to be comfortable around people again or how to interact with people again. But in that journey, I can say that where I am today is not where I was 7 years ago or even 1 year ago. And so I just wanted to draw attention to that for myself. Otherwise, this mountain is too big to climb. And I don't even think that there's ever going to be a point where I feel like I achieved this goal. I'm just hoping that on the way, I'll at least get to a point where I no longer feel scared of interacting with people anymore. But yeah, anyway, as always, thank you for indulging me. If you made it this far, I really, really appreciate you watching. But yeah, with that said, I wish you all the very best going forward. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.